What's up, YouTube? I'm here doing my prediction video for UFC Fight Night Santos versus Teixeira. Let's start at the bottom. The first fight is Gustavo Lopez versus Anthony Birch. To me, I think both these guys are good striker, jiu-jitsu dudes. I think it's going to be really close. I think the longer it goes, the more favors Lopez just because he had a full camp. I think Birch is actually a little bit better at both the striking and the jiu-jitsu. I think it's just kind of, can he finish it early or can Gustavo survive the first and then kind of win the second and the third? I think it's pretty close, but I'm leaning towards Birch just because I feel like he is overall slightly better at both the striking and grappling. So I'm going to say he wins by either a knockout or a submission in the first round. Next is Max Griffin versus Razamin. I can't say his last name. And Razum is a really good jiu-jitsu guy, but that's about it. I feel like his striking is just okay. His wrestling is just okay. I think that Max Griffin is the much better striker and the much better overall wrestler. And Max, he's basically been finished one time in his entire career. And that was only because he took that fight in such short notice against Colby Covington that he started to gas really hard. But other than that, like, he's super hard to finish. Like, I mean, he gets dropped every now and then, but his conditioning's so good that he usually recovers pretty quick. And he's never been close to getting submitted. And to me, Razum is basically primarily just a submission guy, and I think Max is going to be able to survive that and just out-wrestle him and out-grapple him, and at least win a 29-20 decision, if not a 30-27, so I got Max Griffin. Next is Darren Elkins versus Luis Eduardo, and to me, Luis is probably a little bit better of a striker, but I think on the ground, Darren's got a pretty big advantage. I mean, Luis has good jiu-jitsu, but I think Darren's just way too good on the ground. I don't think, other than the time he fought Charles Oliveira, I don't think he's been submitted since then. And if anything, his grappling's just gotten better since then. And like I said, I think that he just kind of avoids the big strikes, gets us to the ground, and just grinds out a 30-27 decision. Next is Alexander Romanov versus Marcos Rodrigo. Okay, it's Marcos. To me, Alexander's just got a massive wrestling advantage. We saw in his UFC debut. I mean, the guy he was fighting is, if you've seen him fight outside the UFC, he's not like the greatest grappler of all time, but he's an okay wrestler. I know he didn't look it in that fight, but I would say Marcos is probably a little bit better of a wrestler, but not a significantly better wrestler. I think Alexander, if he's ever able to take Marcos down, he's just going to wear him out and beat him up. I think Marcos' only chance is to knock Alexander out early, and other than that, I think Alexander dominates this fight with his wrestling, and that's just what I see happening. I think Alexander avoids the big punches, gets us to the ground, just beats up Marcos until he wins by submission. So I got Alexander winning by probably second round sub. Next is Giga Jakadze versus Jamie Simpsons, and Jamie's taking this fight in super short notice. He's an okay fighter everywhere, but not super amazing anywhere. And to me, I think Giga's just going to tear him apart. I think he's going to outpoint him all 3 rounds and eventually win by KO or decision. I think Giga, he deserves a top 15 guy at this point, or someone right outside the top 15. And I know he was supposed to get someone higher up, but the guy got injured. I can't remember who he's supposed to fight. But yeah, I mean, he's just taking this fight to get another win. And like I said, I think he dominates this fight pretty easily. So I got Giga winning by either decision or knockout. Next is Trevin Giles versus Bevon Lewis. And this is basically just 2 good strikers going at it. I think, if anything, Giles probably has a slight advantage on the ground if it goes there, but I don't think it will. To me, I think the biggest thing is just the power. I think they both have good striking. But I think Lewis is probably a little bit faster, but I think everything else is pretty much the same except power. I think Giles has a massive advantage in power. Like, he doesn't even wind up super hard, but you can see when he hits people, he just has a lot of power in his hands and kicks and stuff like that. And I think the longer this fight goes, if these guys are hitting each other about the same, which I think they are, Bevon might land a few more strikes. I think the damage is going to add up, and I think come the 3rd round, Giles is probably going to get a finish just because he's going to be hitting him harder the whole time. So yeah, I got Giles winning by 3rd round KO. On the main card, the first fight is Claudia Gadelha versus Sean Naunan. And to me, this is really just, can Claudia get it to the ground? Because I think if Claudia gets this to the ground, she could probably win by sub. I think the more Jan can keep this on the feet, the more it's going to favor her. But ultimately, like I said, it's can Claudia get to the ground? I think she can in the first. And I think if she does, she's probably going to win by sub. And, I mean, I really don't have too much to say about this fight because I think it's pretty straightforward. I think that Jan on the feet wins and Claudia on the ground wins. And I do think in the first round, Claudia can take almost anyone to the ground. And I think if she gets Jan to the ground, She's probably going to win by sub, so I'm leaning towards Claudia to win by first round sub with like a rear naked choke. Next is Ian Heinisch versus Brendan Allen, and this fight depends entirely on if Allen can get this to the ground, because I feel like Heinisch is probably just going to want to kickbox with him, and if it's just a striking fight, I'm leaning towards Heinisch. But I do think Allen is good enough to force this to the ground. And like I said, if it's on the ground, I think he's got an advantage. I think his jiu-jitsu game is better than Heinisch's overall wrestling game. I think both these guys have really good conditioning, so that's not a huge factor. I think the biggest factor is just Heinisch's striking. I think he's definitely the better striker of the two. That's what makes this fight so hard, is because if he is able to keep Allen off of him, I think he's going to outpoint him and maybe even knock him out. But I'm leaning towards Allen to be able to drag this to the ground. If he does, I think he's going to win at least a 29-28 decision. This is the toughest, either the toughest or the second toughest fight in the whole card to call, but I'm leaning towards Allen to win a 29-28 decision. But don't be surprised if Heinisch wins by KO. Next is Ronnie Barsolas versus Khalid Taha, and to me this is really tough because Khalid, he got tested positive for steroids basically, or he got tested positive for the steroid blocker. When you get tested, it can prevent the test from seeing the steroids. So it's one of those things where it's like, he didn't test positive for steroids, but he tested positive for the thing that prevents you from knowing if someone took steroids. My biggest thing is I think that striking-wise, these guys are pretty even. I think overall wrestling, Taha's a little bit better just because of the power, but I think anywhere on the ground, if Barcelos can get us to the ground, he's got a significantly huge advantage in the jiu-jitsu. And that's what I see being a big thing. I think that if Taha isn't on any roids, which he probably might have been, in all honesty, just based on how strong he looked, I think if Barcelos is just wrestling with this guy against the fence and stuff like that, I think he's going to win by sub. And that's what I think is the most likely scenario. I think the striking will be close. Taha might even hit Barcelos with one or two decent shots before Barcelos just decides to take it to the ground. And once again, I think once it's there, Barcelos is just a huge gap in terms of the jiu-jitsu. And I think he's either going to dominate him on the ground or win by sub. So I got Barcelos winning by second or third round sub. Next is Andrei Arlovsky versus Tanner Boser. And to me, this fight's a coin flip. I think that they're both good technical strikers with okay knockout power. If anything, Arlovsky's got a little bit more knockout power. He hasn't been knocking guys out as much in his more recent fights, but the thing that we've seen more out of him is the ability to maintain a solid pace and a good striking output, which I prefer, because most of his knockouts were like first-round knockouts and then he gassed really hard. I'd rather see him fight a solid fight for 3 rounds when you know how good his striking is. Like, I would say the biggest thing is Boser is getting a little bit better at this, but he does have a tendency to not have high output. And I think that that's something that Andrei Arlovsky can take advantage of. And that's the biggest fear I have going into this fight is overall I think these guys are about even everywhere. But the guy who's more likely to throw less is Boser. Arlovsky has shown that he's good at throwing the same amount of strikes every single round and landing about the same consistency in his last 6 or 7 fights. And Boser to me is still, it seems like his game is still evolving. And if he can't catch Arlovsky, which I don't think he will, I'm just leaning towards Arlovsky because we've seen he's able to throw the same consistent pace. And I think this fight will be close, but I think Arlovsky's going to win. Maybe either a split decision or a 29-28 decision. But I do think it's going to be close, but I'm leaning towards Arlovsky. Finally, we got the main event. It's Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. And this fight largely depends on how good Santos' knees have recovered, because they were both pretty badly damaged in the Jones fight. He hasn't fought in a long time since then. And this is the biggest thing for me. In terms of overall striking, Santos definitely has an advantage. But in terms of the overall grappling, Teixeira has just as big an advantage. And my biggest thing is guys haven't been shooting on Santos, and I don't know why. Because I remember in his light heavyweight debut, Eric Andrus got a lot of takedowns. It's not like his takedown defense has always been this insanely good thing. I mean, it's good, but at middleweight, I remember Musasi taking him down. I remember some other jiu-jitsu guys taking him down. He has good takedown defense. I just don't think it's insanely good. I think that if Glover really tried to take him to the ground, he could probably get it there. And if Glover's on top of him, I think that that's a huge advantage for him. Because my biggest thing with Santos is he still kind of looks like a middleweight, in my opinion. I think he looks a little bit smaller than a lot of the light heavyweights. It was the same thing with the guy that I can't remember his name. The guy that Glover just beat. I mean, he's really tall and lanky, but I feel like he's got a really slim frame, kind of like a Nate Diaz style. And I think that this is the same thing. I think that if Glover really tries to get this to the ground, he will. And I think if it's there, he's going to win by sub. So I'm going with Glover to win by first or second round sub. I think this is going to be an insane fight. I think as long as this fight goes, it's going to be crazy. I think it's probably going to be fight of the night. And like I said, I think in the first 2 rounds, either Santos is going to knock Glover out or Glover's going to get him to the ground and win by sub. And I'm leaning towards Glover getting the sub. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe.